The network news truck arrived Monday morning at precisely 9 a.m., which told Seth Morrison everything he needed to know about how seriously they were taking this story. Behind the main truck came two vans, one labeled Paranormal Research Institute and another that appeared to belong to a production company. Seth watched from his office window as the convoy parked along Main Street. A man in an expensive suit emerged from the lead vehicle, immediately flanked by a production assistant with a clipboard. The news anchor introduced himself as Michael Hastings, Network Northeast Bureau. He had the kind of professionally concerned expression that probably worked well on camera, deeply interested in getting to the truth. With him were Dr. Patricia Chen and her associate Kevin from the Paranormal Research Institute, both carrying what looked like very serious electronic equipment. Seth welcomed them to Gull's Haven and explained he was one of the town selectmen, happy to help with their story. Michael asked immediately about Abigail, the woman from the video. Seth maintained his pleasant expression and explained that Abigail was quite shy, actually. The attention had overwhelmed her. She'd mentioned something about visiting family in Canada until things settled down. He could try to reach her, but he couldn't promise anything. Michael's smile tightened slightly. He then asked if they could proceed to the Rusty Anchor, where the original video was filmed. Seth said, of course. He had notified the owner, Roy, the previous day, but he would call ahead just to make sure he was there. 20 minutes later, the entire entourage descended on the Rusty Anchor. Roy was waiting at the door, having been briefed by Seth, though his expression suggested he'd rather be doing literally anything else. He let them in without enthusiasm, flipping on the main lights and gesturing vaguely at the interior. Michael and his crew immediately began setting up cameras, lights, the whole operation. In the larger back room, the same one where Abigail had performed her vanishing act, Dr. Chen and Kevin unpacked their equipment. Gus had already positioned the large mirrors he'd borrowed from a gallery in town, leaning them against the walls as part of a quiet ruse. If anyone asked, he would simply suggest that Abigail had probably used the mirrors in her act. How exactly they didn't know. Plausible and conveniently ignorant. Slim arrived holding a bag of groceries and walked straight to the kitchen, completely ignoring the invasion at his workplace. Dr. Chen noticed him immediately. She asked Roy who that was. Roy said that was Slim. He ran the kitchen. Dr. Chen pulled out what looked like a modified tablet covered in sensors. She asked how long Slim had worked there. Roy said he wasn't sure. Maybe 5 years, maybe more. Kevin whispered something to Dr. Chen, pointing at a readout on the device. She nodded, her expression growing more intent. She asked Roy if anything unusual had ever happened with Slim. Strange disappearances, unexplained phenomena. Roy said Slim showed up, cooked, went home. Pretty standard employee behavior. In the kitchen, Slim began his work, completely unaware that he was being considered as a potential ghost. He was, in fact, entirely human, just unusually quiet and deeply committed to being left alone. Dr. Chen approached the kitchen doorway slowly, holding her device out like a divining rod. The screen showed various graphs and numbers that probably meant something to her. She called out a greeting to Slim, asking if she could ask him a few questions. Slim looked up from the vegetables he was chopping, registered her presence, and returned to his work without responding. Dr. Chen tried again, explaining they were investigating paranormal phenomena. Had he noticed anything unusual in the building? Slim said no. Did he ever see the woman who disappeared on camera? Slim said sometimes. Dr. Chen's eyes lit up. She asked when he saw her last. Slim said he didn't remember. Then he pointed his knife at the back room and told her she was in his prep space. Dr. Chen retreated, convinced she was onto something. She told Michael that the kitchen worker was exhibiting classic avoidance behavior, possibly due to supernatural influence. The readings near him were definitely anomalous. Michael asked if she thought he might be a ghost himself. Dr. Chen said it was possible, though he seemed quite solid. More likely he was sensitive to paranormal energy, perhaps a conduit. In the kitchen, Slim continued chopping vegetables, wearing his cowboy hat, completely unconcerned with being labeled a paranormal conduit. The back room was filled with equipment now. Cameras on tripods, electromagnetic field detectors, thermal imaging devices, audio recorders designed to capture electronic voice phenomena. Dr. Chen explained to Michael's camera that they were creating a comprehensive monitoring net. Any paranormal activity would be detected and documented. What none of them noticed was the faint shimmer near the ceiling in the far corner, where Abigail's friend Misty was watching. Misty had decided this was far too entertaining to miss. She'd been at the town meeting and heard the entire plan about staying away from cameras, but surely being invisible didn't count. Misty was a young ghost, perhaps a teenager, who looked up to Abigail. She had always admired the way Abigail mixed teasing with mischief, delighting in the fun she seemed to have with both. She drifted closer to the equipment, invisible, curious about all the blinking lights. Kevin's EMF detector suddenly screamed to life, the needle slamming to the maximum reading. He shouted for Dr. Chen, who rushed over with her tablet. Multiple devices began registering simultaneously, lights flashing, alerts beeping, the thermal camera showing a cold spot that shouldn't exist. Dr. Chen was ecstatic. She called for Michael's camera, declaring they were getting real-time paranormal readings, significant activity. This was exactly what they'd hoped to find. Misty, delighted by the reaction, drifted to a different corner. The equipment followed her movement, detectors wailing, Dr. Chen narrating the phenomenon with growing excitement. She was describing it as a Class 4 manifestation, extremely rare, possibly an entity attempting communication. Misty laughed to herself, thinking how Abigail would be proud. Roy watched from the doorway, arms crossed. He caught Slim's eye as the cook emerged to see what the commotion was about. They shared a look of profound weariness with the world. The ghost hunting continued a bit longer as Misty led them on a merry chase around the bar. Dr. Chen was in heaven, documenting everything, building her case for genuine paranormal activity. Misty slipped into a spot beneath the shuffle alley game, and that was where they lost her trail. Dr. Chen and Kevin suggested the ghost must have left. They agreed they had more than enough footage. Everyone thanked Roy for his cooperation and asked if they could come back another time. Roy replied politely that they were welcome any time. As the news crew packed up their equipment, Misty made one final mischievous decision. She drifted past Dr. Chen's tablet and exhaled, a ghost's cold breath, directly on the screen. The device's temperature sensor registered a sudden drop of 15 degrees. Dr. Chen gasped, showed the reading to Kevin, and declared it was the strongest evidence of intelligent haunting she'd encountered in 10 years of paranormal research. After they left, Roy locked the door and turned to find Misty fully visible, sitting at the bar with a huge grin on her face. Roy said that was not staying out of sight. Misty pointed out she'd been invisible the whole time. That counted. Slim emerged from the kitchen, looked at Misty, looked at Roy, and returned to his prep work without comment. Whether he could see ghosts or simply didn't care was a question no one had ever bothered to ask him. By Wednesday, Augustus Alby's ghost tour had become the most talked-about attraction in coastal Maine. Word of it spread faster than anyone expected, and by evening the sidewalk in front of the cemetery was crowded, well before the tour was set to begin. Michael Hastings and his crew would be there. Dr. Chen and her equipment would be there. 3 local news stations had confirmed attendance, and even the host of a cable paranormal investigation show had quietly added Gull's Haven to his schedule. Augustus was in heaven. This was the recognition he deserved, the audience his talents warranted. He prepared a special extended tour, adding several new locations and a handful of historical anecdotes he'd researched specifically for the occasion. What he didn't know was that Seth Morrison had quietly recruited a group of local residents to attend in period clothing, armed with simple instructions: support Augustus's stories, look enthusiastic, and under no circumstances do anything that couldn't be explained as historical reenactment. Kenny from Marcy's Diner wore what he claimed was authentic 1920s workwear, though it looked suspiciously like he'd just added suspenders to his regular clothes. The ghost community, meanwhile, had received explicit instructions from Captain Elwood. Stay away from the tour entirely. Do not attend, do not watch, do not even think about Main Street between 6 and 8 p.m. The tour began on time. Augustus was dressed in his full town crier regalia, ringing his bell in one hand and holding his lantern in the other. He welcomed the crowd and proudly declared it the most haunted tour in New England. Cameras rolled. Dr. Chen and Kevin followed at a respectful distance, their equipment unobtrusive but quietly active. At first, everything went exactly according to plan. Seth's recruits blended seamlessly into the crowd. They nodded at the right moments, murmured appreciation, occasionally chimed in with harmless local color. The cameras loved it. Augustus grew more confident with every stop. And then the ghosts began to arrive. Not dramatically, not all at once. They simply couldn't help themselves. The ghost tours had become the ghosts' highlight of the year. They were fascinated. They appeared as people already standing there. A man in an impeccably tailored 19th century coat fell into step beside the group. A woman in a shawl that looked hand-woven rather than purchased joined near the second stop. Another figure lingered at the edge of the crowd, posture formal, expression attentive. They didn't interrupt, they didn't contradict, they simply knew things. At the colonial house, Augustus described the Wickham family. A voice near the back quietly added that Mrs. Wickham had preferred the south-facing windows, even in winter. A few people nodded, assuming it was local lore. Dr. Chen's equipment began to react. Nothing dramatic, just odd patterns. EMF readings spiked briefly, then dropped. Cold spots appeared on her thermal display, not near buildings, but moving slowly through the crowd. Kevin tried to mark the locations, but the readings refused to stay put. "These are following people," he murmured. Dr. Chen frowned. She scanned faces, costumes, posture. Everyone looked solid, normal, human. As the tour continued, more ghosts slipped in, unable to stay away. They clustered naturally, like long-time residents gravitating toward familiar stories. They shared details quietly, conversationally, as if reminiscing. The crowd grew more engaged, more animated. The cameras ate it up. Seth moved constantly now, gently steering ghosts away from Dr. Chen and Kevin, whispering reminders, trying to keep anyone from standing still too long near the equipment. By the time the tour reached Main Street proper, Dr. Chen's instruments were active but inconclusive. The readings were undeniable but unprovable, everywhere and nowhere. No single source, no repeatable event. Augustus, oblivious to the supernatural makeup of his audience, was having the best night of his life. The engagement, the questions, the depth of historical knowledge, this was exactly what he'd always wanted. The tour ended, as it always did, at the Rusty Anchor. The crowd filed in, news crews included, filling the bar to capacity. Roy had prepared for this, knowing it was coming, though his expression suggested he was contemplating retirement. Augustus took his place at the front of the room, bracing for what he assumed would be Abigail's grand demonstration. Instead, Gus announced a special treat, a professional magician to explain the illusions seen in the videos. Enter the amazing Randall, a magician from Boston in a tired cape, carrying a box of props that rattled ominously. He was enthusiastic, underprepared, and clearly not expecting network news cameras. He positioned himself in the center of the room, exactly where Abigail had stood. He asked for a volunteer to confirm he was solid and real. Kenny stepped forward and poked him in the stomach. Confirmed solid. Randall spun, flourished his cape, and failed to vanish. He tried again, adding a smoke pellet this time. The smoke filled the room. People coughed, someone opened a window, and when it cleared, the amazing Randall stood exactly where he'd started, now looking slightly embarrassed. For his final attempt, Kenny held up a sheet. The plan unraveled immediately when Kenny dropped it too soon, revealing Randall crouched on the floor, crawling for the door. The locals, in on the plan or not, started laughing. Real, genuine laughter at the absurdity of the failed magic trick. Kenny picked up the sheet and waved it like a flag. Someone called out that he'd seen better tricks at a kid's birthday party. The amazing Randall took a bow, acknowledging the failure with good humor. He said magic was sometimes harder than it looked. The news crews, who'd been filming the entire disaster, began to lower their cameras. Michael Hastings looked thoughtful, making notes. Dr. Chen was conferring with Kevin, her earlier excitement visibly dimming. Seth watched the mood shift. The failed magic trick, the good-natured laughter, the small town making fun of itself, everything was working as planned. The supernatural edge was dulling, being replaced with the image of an enthusiastic community that maybe got a little carried away with its Halloween traditions. Kenny made one last disappearing act of his own, ducking behind the sheet and bolting out the back door, and the crowd burst out laughing again. The network crew began packing up their equipment. Michael did a few final on-camera pieces, standing outside the bar, describing Gull's Haven as a town deeply committed to its Halloween traditions, perhaps too committed to distinguish between historical fact and entertaining fiction. The vanishing woman remained unexplained, but the evidence suggested sophisticated tricks rather than genuine paranormal activity. Meanwhile, Abigail was going stir-crazy, trapped in the firehouse apartment and losing her mind. She'd reorganized the furniture twice, read every magazine in the place, and discovered that she hated modern television with a passion. Abigail missed the bar, the conversations, and the stories. She missed joking around with the living, and sometimes helping them with their problems. Other ghosts kept her company, and Captain Elwood stopped in twice a day. He informed her that the news media was getting discouraged and would likely be leaving town soon. He asked her to hold tight. The plan was working. Halloween arrived crisp and bright. Augustus Albee, in full town crier costume, was ready to lead the parade with appropriate gravitas. Kenny from Marcy's Diner showed up in a skeleton costume that was several sizes too small, the bones printed on the fabric stretched awkwardly across his tall, lanky frame. People had gathered near the Main Street church, the designated starting point. Children in costumes ran around the cemetery, superheroes and princesses, and at least 3 kids dressed as lobsters. Adults chatted in small groups, some in period clothing as requested, others in simple Halloween sweaters or witch hats. The network news truck was there, Michael Hastings in front of a camera doing one last report. 2 local news crews had also shown up, though their coverage seemed more routine now and less urgent. The story was aging out, becoming just another Halloween feature rather than breaking news. Seth stood with Gus and the other selectmen, relieved that the turnout was good, that people had embraced the idea, that everything looked exactly like it should, a small town celebrating Halloween together. The news cameras filmed the parade, but the energy had shifted. There were no mysterious disappearances, no ghostly manifestations, just people in costumes walking down a street, enjoying October. Kenny walked by doing an exaggerated skeleton walk, bending his knees awkwardly and waving his arms. Children loved it, clustering around him, imitating his movements. The parade was cheerful, chaotic, and entirely ordinary. News coverage thinned. By the time the procession reached the waterfront, most of the cameras were gone. The parade gathered at the town dock, spreading out in a loose celebration. Someone had brought cider and donuts. Children ran along the pier, their costumes bright against the gray harbor water. Adults stood in groups, talking and laughing, enjoying the afternoon. And then, as the last news van cleared the edge of town, the ghosts appeared. They came out of buildings and shadows and thin air, dozens of them, wearing their period clothing naturally because it was simply what they wore. Captain Elwood in his 1840s coat, Bob Finch in his ranger uniform, The colonial-era ghosts, the Victorian-era ghosts, the fishermen and sailors and townspeople from every decade of Gull's Haven's history. They mingled with the living seamlessly, and the crowd swelled with their addition. Some of the locals who didn't know about ghosts simply assumed these were more people in costume. Others who did know smiled and welcomed them back. Abigail emerged from the firehouse and practically ran down to the waterfront. She hugged Captain Elwood, who permitted it with a slight smile. She grabbed a cup of cider and rejoined the community she'd been forced to leave. Augustus stood near the edge of the crowd, accepting compliments on the parade, completely oblivious that half the people congratulating him had been dead for decades. He was already planning next year's parade, thinking bigger, more theatrical, possibly adding floats and music. Seth watched from his truck as the town celebrated, the danger past, for now. The plan had worked despite some hiccups. He wasn't sure if it was just luck or if Gull's Haven had some kind of protection built in. The town had been hiding its ghosts for centuries, after all. Perhaps there was something about the place itself that helped maintain the secret. What Seth didn't notice was the sedan parked a block away. Derek Chen lowered his binoculars. He and Maria had stayed after the news crews left. They saw the crowd double. They saw Abigail emerge. They saw people who didn't belong to this century walking openly among the living. Maria asked if he believed it now. Derek watched silently for a long moment. Then he said they should let it be. Let Gull's Haven keep its secret. Some stories weren't meant to be told. If you're enjoying these stories from Gull's Haven, please like and subscribe. Thank you.